I'm here with Bill Hollander, prominent local attorney and former Metro Council representative for District 9, who served from 2015 until 2023. Bill, welcome here and thank you for sharing your insights with all of us. The topics I'm most interested in are have to do with your personal reflection. So the first question is, what did you hope to accomplish when you decided to run for Metro Council? What did you have in mind to do, and how, what were some of the things that were successful for you, and perhaps some of the things that were not so successful? So tell us about that experience.
Well, thank you, Michael. Thank you for doing this. I think local government is just really important. I think if it's done well, it tells people that government itself is important. So I think it helps reflect on the importance of government at all levels. And if it's not done well, it's what people see at their front door, right? They see the garbage not getting collected, the yard waste not getting collected, the potholes not getting filled, the sidewalks not getting fixed. And that reflects poorly on everybody. So what I was interested in, I spent a lot of time involved in neighborhood work with the Crestno Community Council and the Peterson Duminal House and United Crestno Ministries. I was really interested in continuing to help those organizations and others in the district and trying to help people move the community forward. I ran on a platform of having more affordable housing in the community. We can talk about that in a minute because the role is not just for your district, it's also for the whole community. We don't have any at-large council members in Louisville. So you are the representative for your district, but everybody together represents the whole city. So in terms of what was successful and what wasn't, I think it's really helpful, and really useful and really, frankly, very rewarding to listen to people as to what their needs are, and then try to fulfill as many of those as you can. So uh, there is still a sidewalk that I see when I drive down Ewing and uh, and look down the street at Ewing on a sidewalk. I remember walking on that street with a blind gentleman who had to walk on the street because there was no sidewalk into oncoming traffic to get to a bus line and his job on Frankfurt Avenue. And that's the kind of thing you really worry about, right? So when I see that new sidewalk there, and know how important it is to him and see other people on that sidewalk, it's rewarding that you're able to get some small things done. So there are things like that around the district. Um, we worked on the tree canopy, which I think, by the way, continues to need work. I still see people who tell me they see too many stumps and not enough new trees.
Yeah.
So that's something we need to continue to work on. And then I tried to work on some larger things across the whole community. Affordable housing was a real cause of mine. I ran on increasing the affordable housing stock in the community when I ran, and I'm proud of the fact that we went from having a affordable housing trust fund, which had never had any local money for housing. It had been created, but we hadn't found a way to fund it. And by the time we left office, we'd had more than $100 million into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. So, I think those are some of the things that were successful. I, would have liked to have done more, and there are certainly lots of challenges.
Yeah. Well, I do appreciate all the work that you did, and I think that's a very good perspective that you're working within the smaller unit, but you keep in mind the larger concern of the entire community, and that's that idea of a fractal I was talking about before, and I think that's a good perspective. Um, when you got on council, I was speaking with Andrew Owen about this, and he said that you and your predecessor had spent almost a full-time job as a council person, and that's not what all of the council members do. How much time does a council member require? What's the daily commitment you make as a council member?
Well, it really does vary a lot from member to member as to how much time they're personally spending. Um, I was retired from my job. I no longer practice law. So I was able to devote a large amount of my time. Basically, it's what I did for 8 years. That's not true for most members. And frankly, I don't think you want it to be true for all members of Metro Council. That would be a group of people who would have some characteristics that are not, representative of the whole community, right? And so you need people who are working in all kinds of different capacities. There always have been or have been. I shouldn't say always. Part of the time I was there, there were other people. There was at least one other person who was there, um, also retired and very active. He happened to be a Republican. I worked closely with him, and he was there, a lot. Um, it takes some time. I mean, the meetings themselves take some time. Having it a lot depends on how your staff is organized, and frankly, how good your staff is. If you have people who can do a lot of the work for you in a way that you trust, and that can help get things accomplished without personal involvement in time. It's one of those jobs I think you can put in as much time as you want. Maybe you're not as productive for the last part of the time as you are at the beginning. Some things are, you just have to do, right? I mean, and you have to know um, when constituents call, what are the items that have to get elevated to you, right? You don't have to deal with every pothole. If you've got staff who know how to get that pothole reported or to get other kind of issues done. But sometimes things get elevated, either because they're not getting done or it's a unique problem. And at that point, I think it's really critical that members work with their staff to to have a real clear understanding of this is something I want to get involved in personally. Um, and so it's that's part of it. The other part, obviously, is writing legislation and working with members and meeting in the community.
Mhm. You mentioned the sidewalks and affordable housing as some of the issues that came forward. What did you learn about this metro district? This is something that has intrigued me over the years. I know Metro 9 had a different set of precincts when you were in office than it has
Right.
now. The precincts seem to be, or the districts seem to be shifting east as the population moves that way. But what did you learn about District 9 during your tenure that maybe surprised you or something you didn't know beforehand? And then the follow-up is, what are the most pressing issues for this district?
Yeah. So I think the process of running for office is just really important because when you're out knocking doors, obviously, what one of the things you're trying to do is to convince people that to vote for you in the election, right? But you're also, if you're listening, you learn a lot about what people are concerned about. And um, what I heard, and frankly, I knew this from my neighborhood work in advance, but as I uh, campaigned and then served, what I heard a lot was concern about public safety, and not in a way that you hear about in on the news mainly. And we're fortunate to live in a district where there's not a lot of violent crime. There's certainly some crime that's concerning to people, cars getting broken into, and some break-ins of houses and other things. Cars are the biggest issue and have been for a long time. And part of that, by the way, is that people don't lock their doors enough
Right.
in the district, and that's really true. I mean, it really is very true. The police will tell you, and have said this for a long time, that there's an awful lot of people trying door handles, and and opening the door handle that's open,
Right.
and that's just really a crime of opportunity. And they see that in this district and throughout the city. But um, the other concern that people have in public safety is the way people drive, right? Quite frankly, I mean, speeding and careless driving, it has always been bad. I think, frankly, it is worse now than it has been,
Mhm.
and I don't know the reason for that. I think Part of it perhaps is less enforcement. You really don't see a whole lot of police officers doing traffic enforcement. I think that's increasing a little bit, and I think that's probably a very good idea. Because when you develop sort of a understanding among some people that they can run through stop signs and nobody's ever going to say anything about it,
Right.
there are unfortunately some people who just run through stop signs.
Right.
And that can be very dangerous for obviously people in cars, but also for pedestrians. So, and pedestrian safety is extremely important, I think,
Yeah.
not just for kids walking to school, but up and down Frankfurt Avenue, there are a lot of people who walk a lot.
Right.
And we want to see more of that. We want to see more of that out in the neighborhoods. We want to see more of that people walking to Seneca Park. So it's something that I think I learned. Um, there are a lot of sidewalk gaps in the community. And
Yeah.
so when you would build a new sidewalk, and we worked for years on one that actually got completed during Andrea's term, and that's the sidewalk along Cannons Lane to get people in a safe way to the park. That's a big project, an expensive project, mainly federally funded. Took a long time to do. It's sort of was always frustrating to me as to how long some of those projects
Right.
took. But that's very important to people, and you don't. Seneca Park, for example, always seemed odd to me that you have this really large and well-used walking path around the park, but walking to the park is quite difficult,
Right.
right? So you have to drive to go walk, and some people are going to do that, obviously, since they're too far away. But there are an awful lot of people who live near Seneca Park who walk at that track, but have to drive over to it, and that's just it kind of doesn't make much sense. But sidewalks are extremely expensive, so when you build a new one, you have all these other people who say, "Well, what about can I get one in this missing section?"
Right.
And my answer always was, "We will certainly look at it. We'll try to add that to the list." But you have to prioritize what you can do and what you can't do. And it was the same thing with all kinds of things in the district. But Crescent Hill Park had tennis courts that were dilapidated is probably generous. I mean, there were weeds growing out of cracks, a foot high at times until they whacked down the weeds. Very expensive project to completely repave and restripe a tennis court. And then we also learned that pickleball was becoming more popular. And if we could convert, certainly don't want to convert all the tennis courts, but if we can convert one of them to a pickleball court, that there was a good demand for that.
Mhm.
But it's extremely expensive. So we saved money for many years and finally got that done in my last term. So it's you're listening to people as you campaign, but also listening to people while you're in office. These are desires that I really have, and these are things that I think are important for the district. And you try to put all those together and do the best you can with the resources that you have available.
Yeah. One of the issues I walk throughout, I'm in the far eastern edge of District 9, but I walk through this neighborhood and I walk through Crescent Hill and Clifton as well. And the elephant in the room, as far as I'm concerned, is CSX, the railroad coming right through this district. And I have asked over the years about safer crossings for pedestrians on those railroads. And it's a big issue, particularly as you grow older. You're afraid to go across the tracks. Uh, did you have any connection? Was there any impact? I know the horn blowing was a big issue, and of course, after you were there, we had the big explosion that affected people. But was there any relationship between Metro Council and the railroad? It seems like that's a sacred cow that never gets addressed. We can't, God has to ask the railroad for permission, basically. Any connection there at all?
Yeah, yeah. So the railroad is very difficult to regulate at a state or local level.
Mhm.
And that's because of federal protections that are in place for railroads across the country. So we did work on some crossing kind of issues and getting crossings redone. Some of them got in very bad shape, and there was one in Clifton that's used by some of our blind community. We were able to get something done there. We had to work with a different railroad down on Frankfurt Avenue when we built a new sidewalk down on Frankfurt Avenue. It had to cross right there near River Road, and that is an expensive proposition also. My biggest issue with the railroad was in getting the grass cut, quite frankly.
Yeah.
So the the right of way along Frankfurt Avenue, particularly in Crescent Hill, is owned by the railroad, right? I mean, but it's right of way. So it's like the verge in front of your house. You are required to cut that grass, right? The city doesn't cut that grass, even though it's public right of way. You're required to cut it. So theoretically, CSX is also required to cut their grass. Um, and they do cut that grass, but they do it very infrequently. And it gets extremely tall. It becomes a huge problem, sometimes even a visual sight problem as people are trying to turn corners and that sort of thing. I once met with people from their headquarters on Frankfurt Avenue and said, look, I know you're not going to make this yard quality grass, but you can't have your grass be 4 feet tall. And the person looked me in the eye and said, well, actually, we can if that's what we want to do. We don't plan on having it 4 feet tall, but your ordinances don't really apply here. And frankly, I think they were right.
Yeah.
So there were other ways to deal with CSX. I mean, we would call them frequently. We'd take pictures. We eventually found some cell phone numbers that we could send the photos to and say, it's getting awful high here. I once posted a picture and tagged them on Twitter, and that got some action. So, and I tried not to do that very often, but the railroad is it's difficult to deal with, and it's just because of the protections they have with the federal government.
Right. On a different matter, we've seen some changes. Obviously, this year we have nonpartisan races for Metro Council and for mayor. And this is making one of the reasons that motivates me to do educational videos is people don't understand what this is about. And there are a lot of people who come in to vote. I've been working in the polls now for the last 6 elections, I think. And people oftentimes come and vote a straight party ticket, and they don't understand that that's not going to apply here and so forth and so on. But in the end, will the nonpartisan nature of the elections affect the operation of Metro Council? Will it make it easier to do what we used to call crossing the aisle? Will it make it easier for folks from different political backgrounds to work together? Or are we still going to see the binary division there? What's your take on that?
I think it's probably a little too early to tell, um, but I do think it's interesting the way nonpartisan elections have been done. And there are certainly many cities in the country our size who have nonpartisan local governments. Um, my concern about that having been passed by the General Assembly is that's not the system that we voted for in Louisville. Because when we voted, it was clear that what we were voting for was for a partisan mayor and partisan council elections, and there's just no question that's what was put before us and what we voted for. So, to me, to change that without going back to the voters is an issue. How it works going forward, I don't know, but I think it's interesting that the statute that governs Lowell, KRS 67C, continues to call for and have partisan caucuses in Metro Council. So we are going to the names aren't going to be on the ballot, Republican or Democrat, and everybody gets to vote in the elections. It's nonpartisan in that sense. But when you get to Metro Council, you'll still have partisan caucuses by statute. I mean, this is not something that they've just decided members that they want to do. I mean, the statutes still call for Republican caucus and Democratic caucus, and minority and majority, but that's obviously what it is. So, in terms of whether it gets people together and talking more, I have no idea. I think it's also interesting, and Metro Council had a tradition of people working together. It really wasn't like Frankfurt or like Washington, where the majority party just pushed through what it wanted, and the minority party often had very little involvement at all. I mean, we always had a chair of a committee being well, of one party and a vice chair of the other. I was chair of the budget committee for 5 years. My vice chair was Kevin Kramer, a Republican, always, and we worked closely together. I mean, and we always tried to pass budgets that would have great bipartisan support. And I think we always passed them. I don't think we ever had more than 2 or 3 people vote against a budget. And so I think the tradition had been to work together fairly well at the local level. Personally, I think that the change in elections, the nonpartisan election, is more designed to increase representation by Republicans. I mean, that's sort of the people who passed the ordinance or the change in the statute, and I think it is probably designed as much for the mayor's race, not this year, but in 4 years. That's my personal view as to what the idea here is, and I think some of the sponsors have said things that are, make it pretty clear that that's kind of the intention. So how it will affect the operations of council, I don't know. My guess is it won't affect the operations very much. It may affect some elections.
Yeah. Well, in your term of office, what kind of contact did you have with state legislators or with state government? It seems as though to the casual observer that, as you said, the folks on outside of Louisville are wanting to have an increased impact on what happens in our community. And uh, did you have frequent contacts with not only the local legislators in the district, but with people on the state in the state legislature and the state senate? Was that something that you engaged in as a council member?
We did on some things, yes. I was in Frankfurt several times to talk about revenue issues. We were facing while I was on council, we faced a pretty severe issue with our increased budget um, for pension costs. And they were rising, they've been lowering, by the way, since I left council, which is helping the city budget significantly, but they were rising at a really dramatic rate and taking more and more of the city budget. And it forced us to have some cutbacks, including layoffs of hundreds of people, closing the youth detention center, closing a few libraries. I mean, we had some very difficult budget issues. So yes, we did have discussions, particularly at that time with members of the General Assembly, Republicans and Democrats in leadership. At that time, we're all Republicans, about ways that we could try to affect that how best we could. Um, I testified multiple times in Frankfurt about changes to 67C, including the idea of nonpartisan elections. Testified about why I thought that was not a good idea, why some of the analogies that people were making weren't really accurate. There was a lot of talk about how all cities in Kentucky, nearly all cities, it's not all cities, but most cities in Kentucky were nonpartisan in their elections already. I pointed out, I think it's absolutely true, Louisville Metro is really a county government. It's not a city government. I mean, we have 80 some cities in Jefferson County already. What merger did consolidation did, it really wasn't a merger, was eliminate the city of Louisville and create a county government. And so we call the mayor of Louisville the mayor. I think it's really more the better analogy is he's the county judge executive, and
Yeah.
that's what they call that person in other counties.
Yeah.
And we have, instead of a fiscal court, we have a large metro council. Uh, all of those in all other counties are partisan. Now, Lexington is different. That's a whole different situation. They don't have any suburban cities. They have no cities. So they just have one government. And it is nonpartisan. But, I tried to make those kind of arguments. And we talked about other kind of potential changes in 67C. It has been and there's another bill moving through it right now. And we don't know how that will turn out. But in recent years, there's been almost every year, there's been an effort to change Louisville's government. And it's gotten some, I think, sort of outsized attention from members of the General Assembly. And in most cases, the changes have been made by people who don't represent Jefferson County
Right.
and opposed by the people who do represent Jefferson County. So that, it just seems to be sort of an odd situation.
Yeah.
And something we should keep our eyes on. I'll say one other thing about the General Assembly, and I think it's something really people need to focus on. And that's the fact that the role of cities and counties in Kentucky and really kind of across the nation in comparison to the General Assembly, I mean, these are subordinate roles. And cities are creatures of the General Assembly. We were created by the General Assembly. We can be changed by the General Assembly, and we can be inhibited by the General Assembly. So one of the things that I focused on as a Metro Council member was affordable housing. And one of the things I was proud to have passed was something that was in effect in many, many cities and even states across the country, which was a law that said you could not discriminate in housing based on someone's source of income. You couldn't say, I own an apartment building and I rent it, but I won't rent it to people who have vouchers from the federal government. I won't rent it to people who their source of income is something else that I don't like. I'll only take this kind of money. And so we passed an ordinance in Louisville, broad bipartisan support, saying you can't do that. You can still rent at your own rental rate. You can still screen people the way you want, but you can't just say, I'm sorry, I don't take anybody who's on any kind of assistance. Well, that was preempted by the General Assembly after I left office. They just passed a law that said that no local government can have a law like that. Mm-hmm. And that was the first time that there had been a preemption of an enacted ordinance in many years, maybe ever, while Louisville Metro existed. Mm-hmm. There's more of that being contemplated. We passed laws that said there was some regulation on short-term rentals because we were seeing in some of our neighborhoods whole blocks in walkable neighborhoods and near amenities in the community. Whole blocks were becoming mostly short-term rentals, which really affects the people who live there, right? I mean, instead of having neighbors anymore who you know and see and depend on, you have tourists moving in and out, every week. And certainly there's a place for short-term rentals, but probably not a place where you're taking over, whole blocks and big segments of whole neighborhoods. And so we did some regulation on that. Well, there is now an effort in Frankfurt by some of the short-term rental companies working with lobbyists to get the General Assembly to say cities can't do that anymore. Mm-hmm. And that really limits, I think, the ability of metro government to do something that's good. Yeah. And that's been well thought out. And frankly, it may be different here than it is in many other cities and even particularly in rural areas of Kentucky. But if you've got people from those other cities or rural areas making all the decisions about how we can be governed in Louisville, that's a real problem. And it's something really, really for people in Louisville to keep their eye on.
Yeah. Well, one thing from my perspective, it's interesting that I am trying to promote this idea of a precinct identity. I want people in my precinct to, I draw them a map and show them exactly the boundaries of the precinct, and then I show them, who their representatives are and where to go for certain things. And it seems to me that if someone from a rural county thinks of a precinct, it could be half the county. And so their sense of precinct and district and neighborhood, whatever that means to them, is entirely different from ours. I mean, we have situations where people living across the street from each other are not only in different precincts, but are in different state representative districts and state senate districts or metro council districts. And so the precinct notion becomes really important as a way to communicate between urban and rural. I've always felt that the divide is not so much red and blue, it's urban and rural. That's how it breaks down. And it's sort of like the blind man and the elephant. We're looking at something from different perspectives and we're not understanding it. So I appreciate the things you were saying there. I guess my hope is that whoever is representing us makes more contacts with people in rural areas and helps explain our position. I honestly think that if you move from Jessamine County into Jefferson County, you're going to begin to understand that this is a different deal. It's not the same as a rural county. So it's not that we have different goals. It's that the environment is different and it has to change. So I could go on. I find this very, very interesting, Bill. It's very nice of you and appreciate you doing this. The last question I have for you is we have four people running in this May primary. Um, I've interviewed all of them, and I think they're all very concerned and very capable in their own way, offering different perspectives. But whoever wins this, what advice would you give to them as they start out in Metro Council? What what should they do? What kind of first impression should they make on the council, if you will? What are the advice that you give a new person coming into that group?
Well, I think following through on what you've heard on the campaign trail, as I said, as you knock on a door, you're trying to get people to vote for you, but you're also listening to what those people are saying to you. So I think following through is very important. I also think it's really important that you do everything you can to work with your other members, to learn about their districts. As you said a moment ago, that rural areas of Kentucky may be different than the urban areas. District 9 is different than District 5
Right.
and District 1. And so learning about different areas of the city is important. It's important because you're making decisions for the whole community, but it's also important because you're learning about the issues that are motivating that other council member who you're going to work for
Yeah.
and work with. You also have to understand that you need 14 votes to get anything you want passed. And so, you can have really great ideas, but if you can't get 14 votes, they're just your really good ideas, which you should continue to have. But sometimes you have to make some compromises and you have to pick your issues. And I would encourage whoever is successful in this race to do that, to figure out what is a real priority that I want to work on and how am I going to try to work through it. One of the things I did early on was talk to a lot of members about affordable housing and say, this is very important to me. I asked council leadership if I could be a member on the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. There's a council appointee to that. I did that. So I was trying to learn all I could. And I also told people, I want to really work on this issue and I want to do everything I can to move this forward. I also want to address all of your concerns about this. And I worked with advocates who were also interested in affordable housing and tried to build a coalition. And I think that's very important. So it's a team effort, and I would encourage anybody who's going to take the job to treat it that way. And of course, continue to listen to people in the district. They'll have good ideas, not all of which you'll be able to do, usually because you don't have enough money. Um, but to see what you can prioritize in order to move the district and the community forward.
Very good. Bill, thank you so much. I really enjoyed speaking with you this morning, and I hope this will inspire some of the new council members and inform some of our voters here.